There's a moment in human life where something begins to break, not on the outside, but inside, where what used to work doesn't anymore, where the patterns you relied on start to feel strained or even false. Pressure builds, tension builds, and eventually something gives, not as chaos, but as reorganization. Because when enough pressure accumulates in a system, it does not just change, it transforms. Now here's the question. What if that process isn't just happening within individuals, but across the entire planet? What if consciousness itself, human consciousness, is not isolated, but participating in something larger? Can human consciousness affect the planet? Most of us were taught that thoughts are private, that consciousness happens somewhere inside of the brain, and that what we think and feel may influence our bodies, maybe even our close relationships, but not much beyond that. We may believe that the mind is personal, internal, and self-contained. But what if that assumption is incomplete or totally mistaken? In the last episode, we explored the possibility that the earth is not inert, that consciousness is not limited to human cognition, but layered and dimensional and woven into reality itself as an organizing intelligence, expressing through form. With that even partially true, a deeper question naturally follows. Does human consciousness participate in larger systems? Does it interact with the world around it in ways that are subtle, cumulative, and perhaps not yet fully understood? In this video, we will explore that possibility, not as a superstition, not as spiritual wishful thinking, but as a pattern worth considering carefully, because there is something that we already know with certainty. Consciousness affects biology. The human body is not just chemical, it is electrical and electromagnetic. The heart generates a measurable electromagnetic field that extends beyond the body. The brain does that as well, and these fields are not abstract. They are detectable and they interact with the environment. The placebo effect demonstrates that beliefs can alter physiology. Psychoneuroimmunology shows that emotional states influence immune response. Chronic stress reshapes the nervous system. Coherence between heart and brain positively alters hormonal output and perception. These are not mystical claims. They are measurable phenomena. The mind does not sit apart from the body. It participates in it. So, the question isn't just whether the mind affects the body, it's whether the body, as an electromagnetic system, participates in something larger than itself. The real question is not whether consciousness has influence. It clearly does. The real question is how that influence scales. Does it remain confined to the individual body, or does it participate in larger systems like families, cultures, ecosystems, perhaps even planetary processes in ways that are subtle, cumulative, and real? When nervous systems are interconnected through language, emotion, behavior, and shared attention, influence does not remain isolated. It circulates through the network. Social science already shows that moods spread across communities, that behavior cascades through social groups, and that collective sentiment shapes markets and movements. Networks amplify patterns. Once systems are interconnected, effects compound. Individual coherence contributes to systematic coherence. Individual fragmentation contributes to systematic instability. We already use the language of fields in physics and biology. A field, in simple terms, is a distributed pattern of influence across space. It is not a solid object. It is relational, dynamic, participatory. We speak of electromagnetic fields, gravitational fields, and ecological fields. What if consciousness operates in similar ways? Not as magic, not as fantasy, but as distributed influence arising through interconnected systems. Complex systems do not just transmit influence, they reorganize around it. In network theory, small inputs can create disproportionate effects once certain thresholds are reached. Patterns accumulate, pressure builds. At a certain point, the system shifts in its structure. This isn't mystical. This is how phase transitions work. Water becomes steam, markets crash, ecosystems collapse, or they regenerate. The shift doesn't happen because of one isolated input, but because of accumulated influence reorganizes the whole. Now imagine scaling that up. 8 billion nervous systems, 8 billion streams of attention, stress, love, division, coherence, distraction, attraction, like, dislike, but also 8 billion hearts and brains generating electromagnetic fields, continuously interacting with their environment. We are no longer isolated individuals. We are a planetary network, and networks behave differently than individuals. Systems theory shows that when networks reach certain thresholds, phase transitions occur. A system reorganizes. It does not simply change gradually, it shifts structure. We see this in ecosystems, in climate systems, in financial systems. When pressure accumulates, the system eventually reorganizes, and we see it in ourselves. There are moments in a human life when something builds quietly beneath the surface. Tension, contradiction, misalignment, alignment. A person can live for years and even decades in fragmentation, operating from stress or unconscious patterning until a threshold is reached. Sometimes it's dramatic, sometimes it's quiet, but there is a moment when the system reorganizes. An alcoholic reaches the point of enough. A seeker reaches a point of deeper sincerity. A person no longer wants to live divided between what they know and how they act. That shift is not incremental, it's structural. A nervous system reorganizes, priorities reorganize, and identity reorganizes. What was once tolerated becomes impossible. What once seemed abstract becomes urgent. The system moves towards greater coherence for those who aspire towards a more deeply integrated life. Not merely religion, but knowingness. This process becomes conscious, intentional. Emotions are no longer suppressed or indulged blindly. They are observed, unified, and refined or purified. The mind aligns with deeper intelligence. The individual system becomes more coherent. And when coherence increases, perception changes, behavior changes, and relationship to the world changes. In other words, consciousness evolves under pressure, not randomly, but towards integration. In esoteric traditions, there is a phrase that describes this moment of pressure and reorganization. It is called the dweller on the threshold. It sounds mystical, even dramatic, and it does not have to be. Stripped of symbolism, it simply describes the point at which a person can no longer avoid their own fragmentation. The accumulated tensions of fear, ego, avoidance, and misalignment rise to the surface, but at the same time, something else is emerging, a clear sense of truth, of alignment, of realization and perhaps of deeper purpose, not just intellectually, but in a way that asks to be lived, that makes misalignment impossible, impossible to ignore. Like light revealing what was always there but couldn't be seen before, the old structure of identity begins to destabilize. Something in the individual system demands integration. This isn't superstition, it's structural. When enough inner pressure accumulates, the psyche reorganizes. The seeker either turns away, doubling down on old patterns, or it turns inward, toward alignment. What spiritual language calls awakening, psychology may call integration. What mysticism calls initiation, systems theory would call a phase transition. There are patterns to how it unfolds. You could call them stages or even initiations, some subtle, some more defining, points where something shifts at a fundamental level, reshaping the very foundation one is living from. The threshold is not a monster, it is a mirror. It is the moment when incoherence becomes visible and the possibility of deeper coherence becomes real. If individual consciousness reorganizes under accumulated pressure towards greater integration, and as networks reorganize when thresholds are reached, then the pattern is not mystical, it is structural. What happens within a person may mirror what happens within a civilization. And what happens within a civilization may participate in something even larger. Why would consciousness be exempt from the very laws of transformation that govern every complex system? Some researchers have explored whether meditation groups correlate with measurable reductions in violence. Others have studied global emotional synchronization during major world events. While interpretations may vary, a consistent pattern continues to emerge. Coherence appears to stabilize systems, while incoherence amplifies instability. This does not mean thoughts directly cause earthquakes. It does not mean tectonic plates respond to individual prayers, but it does suggest something more nuanced. Systems are sensitive to alignment. Systems respond to pressure, and in biological systems, that alignment is not only chemical, it's electromagnetic. Systems reorganize around coherence. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet with over 14,000 trance readings, once suggested that shifts in human consciousness and geological shifts were not entirely separate processes. Whether one interprets his readings literally is secondary. What's interesting is the pattern he was pointing towards. Inner imbalance and outer instability reflect one another within a larger system. Even psychologically, we understand this metaphor. Suppressed tension eventually expresses somewhere. What is not integrated internally often manifests externally. Now consider that metaphor scaled to civilization. If billions of people operate from chronic fear, division, fragmentation, and stress, division, does that shape the system that we build? The policies that we enact? The environments we alter? The feedback loops that we trigger? Of course it does. We do not need mysticism to see that, but mysticism and science may be describing the same pattern from different vantage points. Field theory implies participation. You do not step outside of a field. You contribute to it simply by existing within it. The quality of your coherence, your attention, your intention, your motives, your regulation, your alignment, these are not isolated phenomena. They ripple. Prayer and meditation are often misunderstood as attempts to manipulate outcomes. But perhaps their deeper function is alignment. It's not what we pray for, but where we pray from. A regulated nervous system behaves differently in the world than a dysregulated one. A coherent individual influences relationships differently than an incoherent one. Multiply that not by one, but by thousands, by millions. The changes won't look spectacular. It won't arrive as a single visible event. It will be incremental. It will look like people regulating themselves instead of reacting, like conversations that de-escalate instead of fracture, like decisions made from clarity rather than from fear. Small changes in perception, behavior, and regulation that, over time, alter the larger field. It will look like greater honesty, deeper alignment, and fewer unconscious reactions. It will look like coherence spreading quietly through human systems. And when coherence spreads, systems stabilize. Earth is a participatory system, and if consciousness operates in fields, then our awareness, attention, and intention carries influence, not in a theatrical sense, not in a way that overrides geology or physics, but in the way that coherence stabilizes networks and incoherence destabilizes them. Perhaps planetary awakening is not about spectacle. Perhaps it's about increasing coherence within the human field. And if we are expressions of the earth, not separate from it, then our inner alignment is part of its evolution, not as controllers, not as saviors, but as participants. The real question may not be whether human consciousness affects the planet in some grand mystical way. The real question is whether we are willing to take responsibility for the quality of awareness we contribute to the field every day. Because even if the influence is subtle, it is not insignificant, and subtle shifts sustained over time reshape worlds.